So what we're doing today is we're going to be going through some more research methods practice questions just to apply our knowledge of research methods and there's key science skills there. So getting straight to it, there's a multiple choice question. There's a scenario here and then some multiple choice questions that follow it. So what I want you guys to do is take about, you have to read the scenario as well. So I'll give you guys about maybe 2 minutes to answer these questions here. Okay, so 2 minutes on the clock. Read through that scenario and then answer the 3 multiple choice questions. And your time starts now. All right, so this question is basically a scenario, a small research scenario, and then you've got 3 multiple choice questions that follow up. So we'll just go through the scenario, underlining the important bits first. So it says, Dr. Rogers gathers a sample of VCE psychology students who have reported feeling stressed due to forthcoming examinations. In order to reduce stress levels, he has half the participants carry out 4 hours of exercise a week, whilst the other half practice deep relaxation techniques for 4 hours a week. He assesses their stress level via responses to a questionnaire at the end of the week. And then you've got 3 follow-on questions. So what I'll do is I'll first project the answers so you guys can tick whether you got it right or not. And then we'll go through each question. So the first question is, what is the independent variable? So when we're talking about the independent variable, we're talking about basically the cause factor in our particular scenario. Okay, in our particular scenario, the variable that's being manipulated is whether participants exercise for 4 hours a week or whether the participants engage in deep relaxation techniques. That's the thing that is basically different between the 2 groups there. Okay, that's the variable that we're manipulating. Okay, whereas the variable that we are measuring for change, or in other words, the effect or the DV, is our student stress levels, because it says that the researcher, Dr. Rogers, assesses their stress level via responses to a questionnaire. Okay, so student stress level at the end of the week is probably the best answer there. Okay, answer A is very similar as well to answer C, but the difference is that the dependent variable for option C says student stress levels at the end of the week, which kind of matches up with the terminology given in the scenario as well. So that's why option C is the best answer, and that's why we've put that as the most correct answer. Okay, and then the last question is, what kind of experimental design was used in this study? So if you have a look at this, there's a little clue. I'll just get rid of all those scribbles. There's a little clue in the scenario that tells you that it's an independent groups design, and that is that he gets half the participants to carry out 4 hours of exercise a week, whilst the other half, okay, the other half indicates that we're kind of indicates that we're talking about a different group. Okay, if it was repeated measures design, not repeated groups, repeated measures design, you know, the participants, it might have said something like he has half of the participants carry out 4 hours of exercise a week, and then the same participants then carry out the deep relaxation techniques, or the same participants come in the next week. So there's some indication that it's the same participants that are being used for both conditions there. Okay, it's not matched participants because there's no indication that he's matched the participants on any variable there. And random allocation is not even an experimental design to begin with. So that's why the best answer is C, independent groups. Remember the formula that we used for independent groups, saying that group A is not equal to group B, or that group A has very different people from what group B has. That's what independent groups is. And that's what we see kind of reflected in this research scenario here. If you've ever got a research scenario where there's 2 clear separate groups and there's some indication there that each group has different people in it, it's not like we're reusing the same person again for each condition, then it's for sure 100% you can guarantee that that's an independent groups or independent groups research design there. Okay. Any issues or any questions, guys, relating to this particular question that we've just looked at? And look, if you do have any questions, just feel free to ask me at any point throughout the session and I can address that. Okay, if you guys don't have any specific issues with this question, we'll move on to the next multiple choice. And the next multiple choice is basically another kind of scenario, but this time it's talking about those research methodologies that we learned about in spread 1B, as well as some of those research designs. So again, because you've got a scenario here to read as well, I'm going to give you guys 2 minutes. Okay, and your time starts now. Okay, this question, I don't know if you guys realize, but this question is a little, not tricky, but a little confusing in terms of the options that are given. First of all, it says Dr. Matthews was studying the value, which in other words is the impact or the effect. Okay, if you ever see the word value, we don't generally use the word value, but this is a question from one of the older exams. So generally when it says the impact or the effect, that's another word for value. Okay, so the effect or the value of counseling in reducing the negative effects of trauma. She divided her trauma patients into two groups. So this is going to now give us some clue as to what design is being used. So she divides the trauma patients into two groups. Group A received the counseling while group B did not. Again, there's some indication there that the groups are separate because it doesn't say group A received counseling and then the same participants were used in group B who then did not receive counseling. It's not indicating any clue that this is a repeated measures design. So automatically I can kind of cross out or eliminate option B. The trial was conducted over a 5-month period. Participants completed a standardized questionnaire as well as a structured interview at the beginning and end of the trial. She compared the measurements from the beginning of the trial with those at the end of the 5-month period to determine if there were any changes in symptoms of distress. Her results in terms of differences in mean symptom measurements were stated or whatever. Okay, so basically what we're talking about here is we're talking about what design or what method was used to conduct the study and then how the data was collected for that study. Now we know that a repeated measures design wasn't used, so that's eliminated. Matched participants design, it's not clear as to whether matched participants design was used, but from what the scenario tells us, it doesn't tell us that Dr. Matthews divided the participants into groups based on how many years they had lived with trauma or based on similar trauma. Okay, it doesn't say anything in terms of how participants were matched to become similar in terms of a certain characteristic. So I would say that based on what the scenario is giving us, matched participants design isn't really something that's relevant there. It can't be a case study either, because a case study is usually an in-depth investigation of a single person. Okay, for example, remember when we studied about Phineas Gage or we studied about Jeannie, okay? Those people were individual people with rare cases. But in this case, Dr. Matthews is not really studying an individual person. And he's not studying something like rare. Like trauma is something a lot of people go through. So it's not like a rare or uncommon condition that he's studying. So for that reason, I wouldn't really go with case study either. So if we eliminate those options, we can see that the best answer would be D. Okay, the best answer would be D because it is an independent groups design that's being used. We can see that because you've got patients divided into two groups and some kind of a clue there that they are separate participants in those two groups or that the participants are different. A self-report is being used because it says that participants were asked, it says that participants completed a standardized questionnaire, and questionnaires are a type of self-report. Okay, along with your interviews and other interviews, surveys, all of those are types of self-reports. Observational studies, you can probably link observational study to this idea that when Dr. Matthews was interviewing these participants, he might have observed some of their responses, okay, in that natural setting when he was talking to them. So that's probably why observational study comes in. That's a little bit funny. That's a little bit of a funny response to put in that option, but that's basically the reason why the best answer would be D there. Okay, so that's the basic idea. Any questions about this specific multiple choice, guys? No, all good. All right, cool. Hopefully you guys are starting to understand how we can determine whether, for example, a matched participants design is used as opposed to a repeated measures design or an independent groups design. So hopefully you're understanding how to annotate a scenario in order to pick out those elements there or to pick out which design is being used or which methods of data collection are being used. Alrighty, so let's move on to the next one. So the next one is 3 multiple choice here. It's again a research scenario. So I'm going to give you guys about 3 minutes to work on this one now. So let me just put my timer on and your time starts now. All right, so this question is looking at Professor Plum, and he's conducting research into the sleeping patterns of first-year university students. She predicts sorry, let me get my texter. She predicts that students who maintain regular sleep times will have lower levels of stress than students who maintain more irregular sleep patterns during a 2-week period. 85 students from Banksia University responded to an advertisement posted on a number of pillars around the student union building. So that kind of gives you a clue as to what type of sampling is being used there. Okay, and then each student is required to complete a self-report for the last 2 weeks of the semester. The University Ethics Committee has ruled out deliberate sleep deprivation of students enforced by the researchers. Okay, so basically, that's the research scenario there for you. So the first question is, which research design would most effectively reduce participant-related variables given the constraints made by the ethics committee? Now, this is a kind of confusing question because a lot of the questions we've dealt with so far talk about like which research design was used in the scenario. This question isn't asking you what research design was necessarily used, but it's asking you which research design would be most effective in reducing any individual participant differences. Remember, the word participant-related variables is basically talking about our individual participant differences there. Individual PD, participant differences. Okay, so we know that from studying the 3 different types of groups, with reference to Professor Plum's study here, the best possible research design that we could use for this study is matched participants design, which is going to be option A. Let me just project that answer up. Okay, the reason we use matched participants rather than repeated measures design here is that it's better to be able to have a matched pair where one pair, for example, goes through the regular sleep time and another pair, for example, has the irregular sleep pattern, rather than exposing the participant to both conditions. Okay, so rather than having a repeated measures design, a matched participants design would be a little more, we could say, ethically sound, okay, rather than putting the participant through both conditions there. All right, so that's why matched participants design would be the best possible answer. Okay, some of you mentioned C. It's not C because C is the actual existing research design that Professor Plum is using, which is correct, but this question is not asking you for what design she's using, but more so for what design could she use to effectively reduce individual participant differences. Okay, I'll show you guys the answers for the others. So the first one is A and the second one is B. All right, so which sampling methods are underlined responded to an ad posted on a number of pillars? We talked about this idea that whenever we're posting an ad, whether it's in a newspaper, whether it's on a billboard or whatever it is, when we're posting an ad and people are responding to that, those people that are responding to the ad are not really selectively chosen by the researcher, but more so they are volunteers. And so the participants in Professor Plum's research here are also volunteers. Okay, and that indicates that convenient sampling was used. Okay, the dependent variable in this case, so when we're looking at the DV, we're looking for the variable that represents the effect. Okay, if we're talking about IV, DV being a cause-effect relationship, we're looking at the effect, or we're looking at basically what are we measuring for change in this scenario. So if you look into the first measuring for change, if you look into the first 2 lines of that scenario there, you can see that she predicts that students who maintain regular sleep times, which is related to our IV, will have lower levels of stress. So this is basically given to you in the scenario. So all you do is you take that information and then you look for the option that's most relevant there. Okay, and the best answer would be B. The reason that the answer isn't C, even though C does mention stress levels, is because C indicates a reduction in stress levels. Now, we can't guarantee that everyone who has a regular sleep time or that everyone who has an irregular sleep pattern will necessarily have a reduction in stress levels. Sometimes stress levels can go up depending on other factors. So it's always better to phrase our DV in a way that's a lot more general without putting any kind of quantity or amount or measurement to it. Okay, so it's better to just say stress levels generally rather than saying a reduction in stress levels, because option C actually assumes what the results will be. And at this point, we don't actually know what the results will be, so we can't assume. All right, so that's the basic idea. Any questions, guys, about this research scenario or any of the questions? All good? Okay. Let's move on to the last multiple choice and then we'll work on our research scenario. All right, so this is another research kind of case study there. This is about research hypotheses now. So you're going to choose what is the most correct research hypothesis. And you'll notice that some of these hypotheses don't start with "it was hypothesized that." Again, depending on which past exam or past question we take this from, past SAC we take this from, sometimes some SACs don't have really kind of like well-written answers or well-written research hypotheses, but I just want you guys to choose the one that's the most closest to what you think represents the best research hypothesis for this experiment. Okay, so again, I'm going to give you guys about 2 minutes, just 1 minute to read the scenario, 1 minute to choose your response to answer this question, and your time starts now. Again, I'll quickly just summarize what we said before. So guys, the answer was option C for this one, simply because option C operationalizes the DV, okay? Whereas in the other options, or in option B, for example, the DV is not operationalized. So that's a simple DV. So that's the reason why option C is the best answer, because it's operationalized the DV and it's got the population and it's got the correct identification of the IV, and it includes the control group. Whereas options A and D are not correct because they include the sample rather than the population, which is not what we want to see. And like I said, option B is not correct because it states the simple DV and it misses out on the operationalizing. Remembering that the formula for writing a research hypothesis is IPOD-C, and the O stands for operationalizing. So this cannot be correct because there's no operationalizing done for option B. So that's why that's also wrong. So the correct answer is C. Okay, so that's basically finished up the multiple choice questions. So now we're going to move on to a scenario. And I want you guys to basically read through this scenario. In fact, I think it's repeated on the next slide as well. But read through this scenario now. I'll give you guys about 2 minutes to have a quick read through it. And then we'll answer just the first 2 basic questions, and then we'll finish up for today. So have a read, 2 minutes on the clock, and your time starts now, just to read the scenario. So when we're looking at this research scenario, we just have to basically annotate as we're reading through it. So it says a researcher wanted to investigate whether being sleep deprived could contribute to weight gain over time. So that's kind of like the aim of the study almost. It's kind of showing us what the objective was or what the purpose of the study was. Okay. And then in particular, she planned to test whether reduced sleep would result in a significant increase in body weight at the end of 12 months. So that's showing us the duration of the study. Sometimes knowing the duration of the study is good, particularly if you're looking at things like participant well-being or whether the no harm principle was breached, because getting participants to do a study for a very long period of time, like a year or 12 months in this case, can be kind of physically exerting for them, or can be quite impacting for them, okay, depending on what the nature of the study here is. Okay, so to test any increase in body weight, the researcher would weigh participants and compare their pre-experiment weight, so kind of like their before weight, and we obviously operationalize weight in kilograms, that's how we measure that variable, with the post-experiment weight also in kilograms. So that's kind of like the after the experiment, or after at the end of 12 months when they're weighed in, that's the after weight. The researcher planned to select 100 healthy adults from the university where she was a lecturer. So that should give you a little clue as to what kind of sampling technique was used. Okay, where she's a lecturer, where it's easy for her to grab those participants. These healthy adults would be aged between 18 and 40. So that's a pretty big age gap. Okay, a lot of individual participant differences can come out of that, and were within a healthy body weight range. So no one was overweight or obese to begin with. So obviously she's controlled for that individual variable of body weight. Okay, she decided she would allocate them equally to either the experimental group or to the control group. So again, giving you an idea of what type of allocation technique was used. And again, the word "or" should also give you an idea of what research design was used. Now, with the operationalizing of the variables, the experimental group would have their sleep time reduced to 5 hours per night. Okay, so they're only sleeping for 5 hours per night for those 12 months, whereas the control group would maintain a normal sleep time of 10 hours per night. So everyone in the control group is sleeping 10 hours every night for the 12-month period of the study. Now, these are the results that the study had basically obtained. As you can see, this is our data, and it's very common for you to get data and be asked to interpret or analyze data in questions like this. We can see that the chronic sleep deprivation group is our experimental group. Okay, so I'm going to put an E. And these are the guys who basically had 5 hours of sleep per night. 5 hours of sleep. The normal sleep pattern group are basically our control group. These are the guys who are not exposed to the IV, or they're not exposed to the sleep deprivation in this case. So these guys basically continue to sleep for 10 hours per night. Okay. And you can see the differences automatically. Okay. If the y-axis is representing the kilograms or the average weight of the participants in each group, you can see that the average weight has actually increased from the before to the after conditions in the chronic sleep deprivation group. It's gone up by almost 64. It's almost gone up by about 2 point something kilos there. Okay. So it doesn't have to be exact, but we can see that there's quite a significant increase there. Whereas with the normal sleep pattern group, or the control group in this case, you can see that the weight has basically been pretty much stable. In fact, they've even experienced a kind of decline in weight there. Okay. So there's no weight gain there to be seen at all. So automatically we can see that the researcher's hypothesis is most likely to be supported by the data, because she hypothesized that being sleep deprived can contribute to weight gain over time. And what we see in the data is that we see that, yes, that is reflected. This is how, or why it's important for you guys to be able to analyze data and link it back to the hypothesis or to the aim of the study that the researcher in the scenario had. Okay, so really important to be able to analyze just simple graphs like this, bar graphs or line graphs, or tables or charts, just in order to be able to understand whether the hypothesis was or wasn't supported. Anyway, so that's the basic breaking down the scenario. So now we're going to go through the first two questions, and you won't need the graph for the first question, so I've just deleted that from this question here. So the first two questions are: describe the aim of this experimental investigation, and then name the experimental research design, and then justify your answer. So name the design and then explain how do you know it was that design rather than another design. So we're only going to work on this question now. So I'll give you guys about 3 minutes in total to work on this question, and your time starts now. Okay, so when we're looking at the aim of the study, like I said before, the aim of the experiment is always given in the first sentence or the first few sentences of the research scenario. In this case, if you see the word to investigate something, that's kind of the surefire clue that that is where the aim is indicated. Okay, so I've just literally taken that information in brackets and put it into my aim there. The aim of this experiment is to investigate whether being sleep deprived can contribute to weight gain over time. So just looking at the effect of the IV on the effect of the DV there. Okay, so yes, so you need to be specific with the terminology here. So you could say whether amount of sleep can contribute to weight gain over time. You wouldn't get that wrong, to be honest. I mean, it would still be correct, but it's better to say sleep deprived, simply because that's the actual IV in this condition. Remember, one group was chronically sleep deprived, whereas the other group had a normal level of sleep. But what you said there, if you've written down, for example, whether level of sleep or whether amount of sleep can contribute to weight gain over time, that's not wrong. That's still correct. Okay, but just about it's just about making sure that we're trying to be as specific as possible. But if you did write that in an exam or SAC, you wouldn't get 0 marks for that. You would still get marked for that correctly. Okay, so can anyone tell me what experimental research design was used in this study? Was it independent groups, repeated measures, or matched participants? Just take a guess if you're not 100% sure. Okay, so it says here the researcher would weigh participants and compare their pre-experimental weight with their post-experimental weight. She decided that she would allocate them equally to either the experimental group or to the control group. What did we say about the word or? What does that suggest? Or what clue does that give us as to what design was being used? If I'm allocating you to one group or the other, it means that you're only going to be present in one of those conditions, correct? If I'm only allocating you to the experimental group or to the control group, it means, for example, I'll be in the experimental group and you'll be in the control group. So what design is it most likely to be? Yeah, it's likely to be independent. Okay, so it is the independent groups, and the word or gives us the clue there. If you ever see the word or, it automatically means independent group design. Okay, if you see the word and would indicate a repeated measures design, because if you're being allocated to both groups, it means that you're repeating the conditions. You're repeating the experimental condition, and then you're repeating the control condition. So you're being reused for both conditions. Okay, so that's the idea. If you see the word or, it indicates the existence of the independent groups design. Okay, so that's the basic idea. So just showing you guys the sample response. Independent groups design is used. This is because the researcher divides the participants into the experimental group or the control group. Okay, with each group having different participants and no single participant being used twice or being used for both conditions. So that's kind of like the justification. So you get 1 mark for naming independent groups and 1 mark for justifying why you think it is independent groups. Alrighty, so that's all we're going to go through for today, guys. So I'm just going to stop the recording here.